Emily Carter used to believe that love aged like wine, deepening with time and patience. Lately, it felt more like water left standing, clear, tasteless, and forgotten. She noticed it most in the evenings, when the house filled with quiet instead of conversation. Daniel Carter would come home later than promised, loosen his tie, and retreat into his phone or his thoughts. He wasn't cruel or unfaithful. He was simply absent in ways that were harder to name and easier to excuse. Emily learned to move around his silences. She reheated dinners, folded laundry alone, and told herself that this was what adulthood looked like: shared responsibilities, separate worlds. When she asked how his day had been, Daniel answered efficiently, like someone closing a task. When she spoke about her own worries, he nodded, distracted, as if her words were background noise. She didn't argue. She had stopped arguing months ago when she realized that being right didn't make her feel less lonely. Lucas Miller entered her life without ceremony. He had been Daniel's friend since college, the kind of friendship built on shared history and unspoken loyalty. Lucas came by occasionally to watch a game, to help with a stubborn repair, to drop off something Daniel had forgotten. Emily noticed him because he noticed things. He asked how she was and waited for the answer. He remembered details she hadn't meant to share. He listened without interrupting, a simple courtesy that felt unfamiliar. There was nothing dramatic about their first real conversation. It happened in the kitchen while Daniel took a call in the other room. Lucas commented on a photo on the fridge, Emily at the beach years ago, laughing into the wind. "You look happy there," he said, not as an observation, but as a question. Emily smiled and shrugged, unsure why the moment unsettled her. She told herself it was harmless, that kindness didn't have hidden meanings unless you gave them one. Over the following weeks, life continued in its predictable rhythm. Daniel worked late. Emily filled her days with routines that left little room for reflection. Lucas appeared now and then, always polite, never crossing a line. Yet Emily felt the shift inside herself, a quiet alertness she hadn't felt in years. She found herself anticipating conversations that lasted a few minutes longer than necessary, noticing how Lucas's calm steadiness contrasted with Daniel's distracted energy. Emily tried to correct course. She suggested date nights, weekend walks, small rituals meant to stitch closeness back together. Daniel agreed in theory, forgot in practice. When plans fell through, he apologized quickly and promised better next time. Emily accepted the apologies because rejecting them felt like giving up, and she wasn't ready to do that. She told herself marriage went through seasons. She told herself patience was love. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Rain rattled the windows, and the power flickered before cutting out completely. Daniel was stuck at work, delayed by traffic and deadlines. Lucas arrived with a borrowed generator, having texted Daniel first. Emily hesitated before letting him in, aware of the hour and the quiet house. She reminded herself that this was normal, practical, necessary. They sat in the living room with a single lamp casting soft light. The generator hummed outside, steady and reassuring. Conversation came easily, drifting from harmless topics to more personal ones without effort. Lucas spoke about feeling stuck between expectations and choices, about friendships that changed as life narrowed its focus. Emily listened, recognizing pieces of herself in his words. When it was her turn, she surprised herself by being honest. She spoke about loneliness without using the word, about days that felt full yet empty. Lucas didn't offer solutions. He didn't minimize her feelings or rush to defend Daniel. He simply listened, his attention unbroken. The simplicity of it made Emily's chest ache. She realized how long it had been since someone had held space for her thoughts without turning them into problems to solve. When the power returned, neither of them rushed to stand. Emily checked the time and felt a flicker of guilt, sharp and sudden. She excused herself, busied her hands, created distance where it belonged. Lucas noticed and nodded, understanding without explanation. He gathered his things, thanked her for the conversation, and left with a quiet promise to check on the generator later. That night, Daniel came home exhausted and apologetic. Emily listened, nodded, and asked the questions she always asked. She didn't mention Lucas beyond a passing note about the generator. As Daniel fell asleep, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the evening in fragments, not because anything improper had happened, but because something important had. She felt seen in a way that unsettled her, and the recognition scared her more than the loneliness ever had. Emily turned on her side and closed her eyes, telling herself that awareness was not action, that feelings were not choices. Yet she sensed the ground beneath her had shifted. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence carried a question she couldn't ignore, one that lingered as sleep finally found her and promised that the days ahead would demand answers. Emily Carter did not confront the unease immediately. She carried it with her through ordinary days, testing its weight against routine, hoping it would dissolve under reason. But suspicion, once named, grows impatient with silence. It sharpened her attention, tuned her to the spaces between words, the moments when Ryan Mitchell's affection felt rehearsed rather than instinctive. Ryan became careful in ways that betrayed him. He volunteered explanations before Emily asked questions. He smiled too quickly, touched her shoulder as if to reassure himself more than her. When she spoke, he listened with half his focus, the other half tethered to a phone that rarely left his hand. Emily noticed how often Sophia Blake's name appeared in passing, always justified by convenience or coincidence. Sophia, for her part, remained present, almost vigilant. She checked in often, offered distractions, suggested outings when Emily seemed withdrawn. Her concern felt sincere, but it hovered too closely, like a shadow trying to match Emily's steps. Emily wondered when attentiveness had turned into surveillance. The truth announced itself without ceremony on a quiet afternoon. Emily left work early, hoping to surprise Ryan with dinner at a cafe they loved. She arrived first and chose a table near the window. As minutes passed, she watched the street fill with strangers and stories that weren't hers. Then she saw them. Ryan and Sophia entered together, unaware of her presence. They were close, shoulders brushing, laughter shared with an ease that no longer belonged to Emily. Sophia leaned in as she spoke, her hand resting briefly on Ryan's arm, not in greeting, but in claim. Ryan didn't pull away. He smiled at her the way he once smiled at Emily. Unguarded, intimate. Emily stood before they noticed her. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Ryan turned, color draining from his face. Sophia's expression flickered through shock, guilt, and something like relief. There were no raised voices, no dramatic denials. Ryan spoke first, stumbling over apologies that sounded practiced. He said it hadn't been planned, that feelings had grown unexpectedly. Sophia said nothing at first, then claimed honesty as her defense. She said she hadn't meant to hurt Emily, as though intent could undo outcome. Emily listened, absorbing each word with a calm that felt unreal. Betrayal had a sound now, a shape. It lived in Ryan's lowered gaze and Sophia's trembling hands. When Emily finally spoke, she asked one question only: how long? The answer settled heavily between them. Long enough to make every memory suspect. Emily left without finishing her coffee. She walked until her legs ached, until the city blurred into motion without meaning. At home, she packed a bag with essentials, moving carefully, as if sudden gestures might break something fragile inside her. Ryan arrived later, full of regret and confusion, asking for time, asking for understanding. Emily gave him neither. She asked him to leave. That night, she slept alone for the first time in years. The silence was vast but honest. Sophia called the next morning. Emily did not answer. Messages followed, layered with explanations and pleas for forgiveness. Emily read none of them. She understood now that betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It arrives through familiarity, through trust offered freely and returned broken. Days passed. Emily moved through them with deliberate composure, returning to work, answering questions with neutral phrases. Inside, she unraveled quietly. She mourned not just the relationship, but the version of herself who had believed in it without reservation. Trust, once fractured, demanded reconstruction from the ground up. Ryan tried again, appearing at her workplace, sending letters that spoke of love rediscovered too late. Emily returned them unopened. She knew that love, which required betrayal to define itself, was not love she could carry forward. News traveled quickly. Friends chose sides or avoided the subject altogether. Emily did not defend herself. She did not need witnesses to validate her pain. She withdrew, choosing solitude over spectacle, truth over explanation. One evening, as she sorted through old photographs, Emily found herself studying a picture taken years earlier at a family gathering. Ryan stood beside her, smiling, while a man she barely remembered stood in the background, older, composed, watching the room rather than commanding it. She recalled his name slowly. Daniel Mitchell, that Ryan's uncle, had spoken to her briefly that day, offering quiet encouragement about her career, listening more than he spoke. She remembered thinking he seemed out of place among louder personalities, as if he belonged to a different rhythm entirely. The memory stirred something unexpected, a sense of being seen without expectation. Emily closed the album, unsettled by the direction of her thoughts. The past had no obligation to explain the future. As weeks turned into months, Emily made a decision that surprised those around her. She resigned from her job, packed her belongings, and left the city she had built her life in. There was no dramatic farewell. She needed distance, not drama. She needed space where her identity was not defined by betrayal. That on her last night before leaving, she stood by the window of her empty apartment, city lights reflecting in the glass. She felt grief, yes, but also something else, relief. The truth, once exposed, had freed her from pretending. Emily did not know what waited beyond this ending. She only knew she would not return to what had broken her. Somewhere ahead was a life untouched by lies, a version of love that did not require compromise of self. She stepped away from the window, turned off the light, and closed the door behind her, carrying forward not bitterness, but resolve.